Hey everyone, welcome back to today's explainer. We're going to be unpacking a genuinely epic narrative from an ancient source text. On the surface, it looks like this colossal cosmic battle between divine forces and these terrifying beings. But I really want you to pay close attention to the end today because the story takes a massive pivot. It goes from this ancient mythological clash of swords and weapons into this incredibly surprising and honestly pretty chilling strategic shift. We're going to look at how a massive physical defeat leads to a terrifyingly brilliant form of asymmetric warfare. It's a wildly fascinating journey, so let's just jump right in. So I'm going to hook you right off the bat with a question. How do you destroy an entire universe? Seriously, think about it. We usually picture total destruction as like massive physical force, right? Giant explosions, cosmic collisions, unstoppable superweapons. But according to our ancient text, the ultimate weapon isn't a sword or a lightning bolt or some meteor. The absolute most effective way to shatter a universe is to destroy something much deeper, something totally invisible. Now, to understand exactly what that is, we first have to witness the sheer scale of physical violence that proved, well, it couldn't get the job done. Section 1, the Clash of Worlds. All right, so we begin right in the thick of this incredibly cinematic cosmic battle. Our source paints this wild visual contrast between the two sides. Basically, there's this overwhelming threat facing the gods. This entity named Vritra is occupying literally the entire earth and heaven. It's a total suffocating siege, and the scale it's kind of hard to even wrap your head around. Over on one side, guarding Vritra, we have the Kalakeyas. The text describes them as these huge-bodied beings with upraised weapons that literally resemble gigantic mountains with towering peaks. I mean, imagine looking up and seeing a literal mountain range moving toward you. And to top it off, they're cased in golden mail, armed with iron-mounted bludgeons, and look like moving mountains on conflagration. Basically, mountains on fire. It's insane. And then, on the other side, we have the gods. And despite being divine, they're totally unable to stand the shock of this impetuous, proud host. They just break, and they flee in absolute fear. The sheer, brutal, blockbuster-style imagery of this combat is just absolutely stunning. Before the gods flee, the encounter is described as terrific in the extreme, completely appalling the three worlds. There's this massive, deafening clash of swords and scimitars. And then the text gives us this vivid, honestly horrifyingly poetic description. Heads began to roll from the firmament to the earth, like fruits of the palmyra palm falling upon the ground, loosened from their stalks. Yeah, it's a bloodbath of cosmic proportions just raining down from the sky. Section 2, the ultimate power transfer. So the gods are losing, and I mean they are losing badly. This brings us to a really desperate pivot in the narrative. The leader of the gods, Purandara of 1,000 Eyes, who you probably know as Indra, sees his forces just flying away in terror, and he watches Vritra growing even bolder. Indra becomes deeply dejected. He's agitated with fear. Realizing he absolutely cannot win this alone, he doesn't just retreat, he actively seeks out the exalted Narayana's refuge. He needs an unprecedented upgrade here. Let's actually break down how this works, because the text gives us this very specific three-step powering up sequence. Indra's might is literally stacked. First, the eternal Vishnu sees a depressed Indra and enhances his might by imparting a portion of his own energy. Second, when the other celestials see Indra protected by Vishnu, they're inspired, and every single one of them imparts their own energy into him as well. Third, the spotless Brahmarshis, these high-blessed Rishis, add their spiritual energies to the mix. So Indra basically becomes this ultimate vessel, heavily fortified and mightier than ever before, carrying the combined power of literally all his allies. Section 3, the fall of Vritra. This brings us to the ultimate showdown. Vritra, who is still occupying heaven and earth, learns that the chief of the Celestials has been filled with the might of all the others. But he doesn't back down, not at all. Instead, he sends forth these terrific roars. And the text tells us that at these roars, the earth, the directions, the firmament, heaven, and the mountains literally all begin to tremble. The tension here is just palpable. Indra, who is still deeply agitated and filled with fear, even with all this new power, decides he has to end this right now. So a terrified Indra hurls his ultimate weapon, the mighty Vajra. And it connects. The great Asura, decked out in golden garlands, falls headlong. The text uses this magnificent comparison, saying Vritra fell like the great mountain Mandara hurled of yore from Vishnu's hands. The prince of the Daityas is finally slain. This overwhelming, mountain-sized threat is completely neutralized in one spectacular blow. Now, you'd probably expect this to be the moment where our triumphant hero strikes a victorious pose, raises his weapon to the sky, and just basks in the glory, right? But the text gives us something incredibly surprising. How exactly did the victorious king of gods react? This is honestly one of my absolute favorite details in this entire source text, mostly because it's just so human. Sakra, Indra, in a state of absolute blind panic, actually turns and runs from the battlefield. He literally desires to take shelter and hide in a lake. Why? Well, because he was so terrified in the actual moment of throwing the Vajra that he thought it hadn't even left his hands. He was 100% convinced Vritra was still alive and coming straight for him. The immense tension of this massive cosmic war just breaks beautifully here, especially because the text notes that while Indra is cowering and hiding in a lake, all the other celestials and great Rishis are up there cheerfully chanting his praise. It's such a fascinating, almost funny juxtaposition of perceived heroics versus internal terror. Section 4, a plot against knowledge. But wait, the story doesn't end with a victorious chant and a god hiding in a lake. We really have to look at the aftermath. With their leader dead, the surviving Danavas are severely afflicted and struck with panic. They completely flee the battlefield, retreating far away from the celestial host, down into the depths of the sea. They enter this fathomless deep, teeming with fishes and crocodiles. And down there in the dark, they start talking. This is where we see a massive strategic pivot. The Danavas retreat to the ocean, the abode of Varuna with billows high as hills, and they make this ocean their new fort. Here, those amongst them that are wise in inferences begin suggesting new courses of action. They realize a very hard truth. They absolutely cannot win a conventional physical war against a foe who can literally stack the energy of the entire divine host. So instead of planning to build bigger weapons or larger armies, these surviving sons of deity proudly conspire to destroy the three worlds through a completely different, asymmetrical method. To understand this terrifying new plan, we need to define a critical concept presented in the text: asceticism. The wise demons conclude that the worlds aren't actually held up by the gods' weapons. They are supported by asceticism. As it's defined here, this represents the foundational practices of virtue, conversance with duties, the ways of morality, and the knowledge of Brahma. This right here is the true load-bearing pillar of their universe. It's the intellectual and moral framework of their entire reality. And that brings us to the really dreadful resolution arrived at by these conspirators in the deep. They declare, compassi without delay, the destruction of those possessed of ascetic virtues. Basically, they decide to target the people, the intellectuals, the moral leaders, those conversant with duties and knowledge. Why? Well, their exact logic is brilliantly twisted. For when these are destroyed, the universe itself will be destroyed. They decide to collapse society from the inside out. They figure they don't even need to fight the gods directly if they can just rot the very foundation the gods stand upon. And the text makes a point to note that upon arriving at this resolution, all the Danavas became highly glad. Which brings us full circle to the question we started with, and it leaves us with this incredibly provocative thought to ponder. If the foundation of a world, literally any world, is its knowledge, its dedication to virtue, and its moral framework, what happens when those are destroyed first? This ancient text tells us a story of a physical monster being slain, only to give birth to a much more insidious threat, an organized plot to erase truth and morality entirely. It really forces us to ask ourselves, are the greatest threats we face the towering mountain-sized monsters on a battlefield? Or are they the quiet conspiracies aimed at eroding the very knowledge that holds our world together? It's a timeless strategy of universal destruction mapped out thousands of years ago, right here in the text. I'm going to leave you to think about that. Thanks so much for joining me on today's Explainer, and I will catch you next time.